I did bloody tell you.
Even as someone who's dedicated the last 2 years to understanding the history of video games and how much we owe our forebears and all the milestones that they hit, it's still surprising to realize you've just lived through one of those milestones yourself that will probably influence generations to come. Just like Doom revolutionized gaming in 1993, so too has Doom Eternal since 2020. March 2020 was a pretty tough time in the US as it marked when lockdowns started and people were sent home to work. But Doom Eternal coming out the very same month was quite therapeutic for those of us who are often content to stay in our rooms anyway and fritter away our lives having more fun than the rest of you. So, neener. Eternal was just incredibly fun and beautiful and deep and polished and well balanced and had a heavy metal vibe all its own that has become its own cliche. Many indie developers picked up on this cliche and ran with it, creating a host of Doom Eternal clones just like Doom spawned in 1993. Now, I can't say that I'm angry that they're copying a great game, but these copies do tend to run together, don't they? Despite being very polished. Adding advanced mobility options like a dash move or grappling hook, an industrial metal soundtrack, weapon quick swapping, resource management optionality for risky attacks. All that does not make your game interesting by default and may just seem like you're adding very little to Doom Eternal's exact formula. But I can't fault games like Ultra Kill, Shadow Warrior 3, Turbo Overkill, Deadlink, Fashion Police, Metal Hellsinger, Project Warlock 2, Postal Brain Damaged, and more for moving in this direction, and they have enough flourish of their own that they should be lauded. Today's Eternal clone is actually the most similar feeling to me to the original game Doom Eternal, and also the one I think could benefit the most from branching out from that. I'm talking about fan favorite Prodeus. Initially, when I got done playing, I didn't feel like I had enough to say to warrant a video, but the more I thought about it, and the longer this video I'm uploading took, the words just came pouring out like a delicious Dr. Pepper body shot.
Your father would be proud.
This mother fluffer was primarily developed by two Chads named Mike Voller and Jason Mojica, whom I may actually live near if his Twitter ain't lying, so that's cool.
He ain't lying.
They actually met while working on Singularity at Raven Software, which is a nice place to just randomly say how much I love that game and how Raven's one of the greatest studios ever, so great minds were definitely thinking alike here.
Anyway.
Before the dudes officially joined back up to start work on Prodeus, they worked at id Software, Starbreeze Studios, and Irrational Games, and contributed to some of my very favorite games like Wolfenstein 2009, Black Ops 2, and other big names like BioShock Infinite, Black Ops, and Doom 2016. That pedigree shines through here in spades, which is a really bad mixed metaphor, and they would only grow stronger once joined by the omnipresent indie composer Andrew Hulshult for the soundtrack and Doom modder Josh O'Sullivan for level design duties.
Speaking of looking like a dick, we are recording. Soundcheck 1, 2, 3.
Penis.
And it's this pedigree that likely helped get the game crowdfunded in 2019 on Kickstarter, no small task even for the most promising of projects. So that's the pomp and the circumstance of the game, but what is it exactly? Well, you may have guessed quite a bit of this already, as I called it or insinuated that it's a Doom Eternal clone about 50,012 times already.
You sure did.
But here goes. Prodeus is a strafe-centric, fast-paced, first-person boomer shooter filled with secrets and key hunting that seeks to recapture some of the straightforward glory of 90s classics like Doom and Quake, but mostly Doom. Doom, and Doom Eternal primarily. The pop-in color palette of reds and greens against industrial grays is straight out of id's recent playbook, as is the soundtrack, which must be what Mick Gordon's dreams sound like. There's a constant, anxious whir of the track pensively holding on to tension even in quiet moments, ready to snap back into a grindy, head-banging groove at a moment's notice. And while the soundtrack will certainly make you clench your butthole and bang your head vociferously, Prodeus also tries its damnedest to make the visuals crunchy and face-meltingly good in equal measure. There are a ton of customization options here, and while the game starts out with 2.5D looking enemy voxels or sprites inside of a fully 3D space with 3D blood effects, you can modify just about any aspect of the presentation, adding CRT filters or swapping out enemy models to 3D for a modern twist if you so choose. The breadth of fiddling that you can do is pretty impressive, and you're sure to find something that appeals to you no matter how picky you might be. I love how you can make it as retro as you want or cut all that out and just enjoy it as a brand new feeling game. And that's the main way that Prodeus makes needed headway in differentiating itself from Doom Eternal. Another way is the solid level design, as you might imagine based on the developer's track record. That's not to say the level design is revelatory or nothing you've ever seen before, but it's definitely functional and has a good balance between corridors and open areas. A fun little detail is that the level selector is interactive, requiring you to choose the level you want to play next by moving your little Prodeus guy between different nodes on a path through a 3D representation of the world map. Now, the actual levels you choose from consist primarily of industrial machinery. There's a lot of lava or goo that will burn you, big meat grinder looking things, moving platforms, elevators, guardrails and pop-up cover, force fields, portals, trams, all the kinds of stuff you're pretty accustomed to seeing in first-person shooters over the recent years. There's nothing too crazy here, and a lot of it looks fine, but it's definitely lacking anything beyond a pragmatic factory setting with a slight grindhouse vibe. Functionally, the levels are pretty solid, as I said before, providing battlegrounds with light cover and ample space to strafe, plus some fun explosive barrel action conveniently laid out for you. But they're rarely conceptually that interesting, or laden with much, only in Prodeus type of iconography. Hey Jonesy, how's it going? But they're rarely conceptually that interesting or laden with only in Prodeus type of iconography. They work, and for the most part, that's good enough, if not a little underwhelming at times. At least until the very end, when the maps have a very Doom Eternal crescendo of getting more and more fantastical. The rare exceptions are the fun gimmick levels like the one where snipers are trained on you the whole time from a high vantage point, so you're dodging between cover to not get one-shotted, but also having to fend off normal ground level enemies at the same time. Eventually you get up to where the snipers are and take your revenge, but not with that intense grind to get there. There's also one really good open area level with a sniper above hounding you as you strafe shoot around a pretty classic arena, but with tons of places to get stuck on. Thanks for that. But that the level design is more about functionality than flourish is probably to account for the absolute butt ton of secrets that are hidden away, but still need to be reasonably obtainable by an intuitive grasp of space and depth. Not only that, but you're going to need secrets big time to do anything beyond just a really basic, normal difficulty playthrough. Finding ore to buy new weapons and ability upgrades like the dash are essential, and for people like me who try in vain to find secrets oftentimes, it was a bit of a roadblock to having enough firepower and abilities to really dominate. Now I say all that not to really complain or criticize the game negatively, but just to make sure that you're aware that some of your enjoyment and effectiveness may hinge on whether you're able to find enough ore through secret hunting to feel effective enough, or to see everything the campaign has to offer in terms of upgrades and new weapons. So again, the levels are tightly designed, if a little aesthetically tame, and count for secrets which are essential to making you a better fighter, so let's focus on just that, the fighting. First off, who you be fighting? Well, you've got these fireball-throwing cats who act very similarly to Doom's imps, specifically the ones from Doom 3. You've got this charging pinky demon type guy, several varieties of Killzone rejects with glowing red eyes and guns, and my personal favorite, these floating crab creatures, which are really good fun to chase around the arena to even the odds. Later energy type enemies and the flying winged mini-boss that become a more common enemy later on are really not very fun to fight though, as they're so much more mobile than you can keep up with and have obnoxiously high damage output, but more on these higher tier enemies in a bit. Overall, enemies are fairly reminiscent of classic Doom archetypes, but they do push you to react and to take them seriously, and that's really the most fundamental necessity video game enemies need to have in order to feel real and interesting to tango with. Now, as for how you get to take these shit sippers down, there aren't any melee options, so gameplay is pure projectile pleasure, which sounds really dirty now that I say that out loud. Fortunately, these are some of the best feeling and sounding guns you'll ever play with in a boomer shooter. The normal suspects show up here like a rapid-fire pistol, double-barreled shotgun, dual machine guns, rocket and grenade launchers, and all that shart. All feel generally great, and pretty much everything but the grenade launcher is immediately effective and has blistering sound effects and feedback, exploding enemies into fountains of viscera. The pistol's auto-fire just has this really great feeling recoil. The laser sniper rifle is obnoxiously powerful and has an orgasmic feedback effect as it vaporizes bad guys. The chain gun is really the most Proteus weapon of them all though, because it lets you just turn hordes into bloody sprinkler systems. The plasma rifle is, well, almost exactly the same plasma rifle from Doom, but that's not a bad thing. It's probably the best weapon in the game and comes with a tagging ability that can give you your projectiles the ability to seek any targets you've tagged. Now, as Under the Mayo points out, this can also apply to random surfaces to set up little clothesline traps should the need arise. The plasma rifle will be your best friend at the endgame too, as it's the only gun that really keeps up the fire rate and damage output that the actual protean creatures require to take down. And while the explosive weapons never really feel particularly good outside of the rocket launcher, which is effective but kind of stiff to aim, I really ended up liking the initial pump shotgun most of all, even after acquiring the double-barreled shotgun. It just felt more powerful and had better range, despite obviously doing less less damage. The double-barreled shotgun is actually one of the guns that suffers the most from feeling pretty stiff to use. It has a really low frame reload animation I didn't quite like, and it just isn't as satisfying as it could be, or as I expected it to be. The aiming on console just always feels a bit stiff, as do the dashing animations. Enemies feel like they're either so slow as to not matter, or kind of obnoxiously fast compared to your capabilities. Pair that with the overload of effects on screen, and stuff can get really hectic without adding anything worthwhile. This becomes even worse when the more powerful enemy variants that bleed glow-in-the-dark halo blood everywhere make the screen look beset by lightning strikes, which are the exact same color as their bodies, and it makes it really hard to know what you should be shooting at. Too much of a good thing, unfortunately. So yeah, that's more or less the combat. Enemies aren't super creative, but they are functional and demanding, and some look really neat. The guns are really well designed and fun to use, and while the movement and aiming are pretty stiff, at least on console, generally the action feels pretty good to pull off. But I have to admit, I was pretty spent on the combat loop right before you journey to the final, admittedly cool levels, because the story just felt like it had been winding down for quite some time already, and the levels and enemy configurations were just starting to blur together. Now, obviously all FPS games are repetitive by nature, so that's not a huge criticism here, and you'd think a game that gets the feel mostly right would continue to be repetitively good, but I couldn't help but feel fatigue over what isn't that long of a campaign anyway, probably in the 6 to 7 hour range, and I can't imagine how tedious it would have been had it not been for the much maligned checkpoint system. Much has been made of the checkpoint system, mostly by people who play games like this to max out the difficulty for bragging rights to their boys and a sense of personal achievement. Now, I'll be honest, I don't give a shit about any of that. I just want to be taken to a new place and convinced I'm there and able to do cool shit I can't do anywhere else. But I understand why some hardcore folks would find the checkpoint system too forgiving. And in case you don't know what I'm talking about, here's how it works. At designated points in each level, there are glowing blue orbs that once passed over will act as a save point for you to resurrect at after your next death. Okay, nothing too crazy, right? Well, the complaint is that when you resurrect, all the enemies you killed stay dead, instead of a Dark Souls style refresh happening where enemies resurrect alongside you. Now, what this means is you can technically just outlast really tough enemy configurations through what feels like a really lame Bioshock bathysphere workaround, respawning as many times as you need to get through the encounter. Now, I totally get why folks are complaining about this, and I think it should have been a toggleable feature, much like how you could turn bathyspheres on or off entirely in Bioshock if you wanted to. I'm certainly not someone who would have enjoyed the game as much if I was having to grind out the perfect encounter each time, as I just don't think the movement's nearly smooth enough to not get stuck on random stuff or clipped by the absolute orgy of enemies on screen, but I am sympathetic towards the position of people who really play games like this as a test of skill or for personal achievement. But yeah man, that's Prodeus' single player. The action's generally pretty good if a little stiff, levels are solid conceptually if industrial to a fault, and the music's banging. Prodeus just feels like another go at Doom Eternal's concept in so many ways with its neon highlighted grunge and bloody epic feel, and that's a great thing that'll appeal to a lot of folks. And speaking of appealing to a lot of folks, I can't go without mentioning Prodeus' real standout aspect, and that is its co-op and community map-making scene. Too few games have co-op these days just in general, even a boilerplate attempt, which is a real shame, so kudos to Prodeus for making the effort. As for its maps, apparently making a flourishing modding community was a central design pillar right out of the gate, and this is what sets Prodeus apart from its competition. Gentlemen like Kurt Collects can give you a really great rundown of specific maps, so I'll point you to their channels for that purpose, but suffice to say, there are tons and tons of quality maps, thanks to the excellent tools available from the developers. Prodeus already has plenty of longevity thanks to how butt-kicking the upper difficulties are and how it really takes a whiz kid to find all the secrets for that ultimate kind of playthrough. Top that all off with essentially infinite possibilities in a map editor that folks are already taking advantage of, and you've got quite the product. Now, I won't say Prodeus is my favorite thing ever, but you gotta admire the level of care here. The game's no doubt been created with a lot of polish, love, and dedication, but I never felt truly free while playing it, and nor did it move me very much. That statement can mean nothing to the people whom this is truly for, I understand, and that's fine, but I did want to express that while it's got some great flourish and style, it's ultimately a pretty standard strafe shooter undergirded with entirely reasonable, well thought out, if not fairly safe design. Prodeus's wins, in my opinion, are its focus on community map making, which I didn't participate in myself, but have witnessed in all its glory, and its awesome Doom Eternal DLC feel. Doom Eternal by any other name may not be as sweet, but it is perfectly fine, and some people are really going to dig it. So give it a whirl, and tell them I sent you. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.